Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for our special food and wine pairing session today with Beringer Bros. Wines and Whisps Cheese Crisps. We're excited. I'm Sam Kimball from New York Wine Events. We have a great pairing session in store tonight, and with two terrific brands and some very eminent guest hosts who you'll meet momentarily. For our wines tonight, we are sourcing from the Napa Valley in California with the iconic Beringer Brothers Winery, famous for 150 years and counting, and going back to the founding brothers, Jacob and Frederick Beringer. And I am going to actually put up in my background here a cool photo of the early days of the winery. You will see there is a lot of history. These are the folks way back when in the late 1800s. We are also going to be joined by Whisps Cheese Crisps for food pairing. You see this farm in my background. This is an amazing dairy farm and one of the farms that supplies the cheese that goes into the cheese crisps that Whisps makes, made from cheese, and nothing else. And also a couple of fun images as we get everybody settled in here. This is a vat that the cheese gets processed and made in, and it's all wheel cheese. These are the wheels of cheese that make Whisps. So we've got a really authentic artisan style food. To learn all about these brands, you can visit Beringer.com and navigate to the Beringer Brothers section of the site, and also Whisps.com. That's WHISPS.com. And it should also be noted, everyone, that there are some really great offers, special offers on both the wines and the Whisps at destinations, which I'm about to share on my screen here. You can get some nifty deals on the products that we're going to be sampling and pairing tonight, and I will show you those right now. Bear with me a second. If you are looking for the wines, you will go to Beringer.com, and there's a promo code you can use. I'm also in the chat. I am going to put the URL that you can go to for both for Beringer and for Whisps. And let me scroll down to another section here, and we will get this out to you. 1 second. In the chat, I'm going to put the URL here. So bear with me a moment. Those are the places you can go to source these products. So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We've got a great group tonight. Please feel free while we're broadcasting to ask any questions during the broadcast in the chat is probably the easiest thing. You can also use the Q&A tab in Zoom. We'll answer those questions, as many as we can, throughout the session on the fly, so to speak. Also, if you would, hit the chat right now and let us know where in the world you are tuning in from. It'd be great to see where everyone is logging in from. We reach people all over the country, so that's a fun part of our weekly broadcast. So without further ado, it's my pleasure and privilege today to host Mark Beringer, the winemaker at Beringer Brothers, and the great-grandson of Beringer Vineyard's founding brother. We also have Gillian Ballance, who's a Master Sommelier, and we're really excited about that. I don't know if anybody knows this, but there are only 172 Master Sommeliers in the US and North America, and only a total of 269 worldwide. And Gillian is really quite something. She is one of only 30 women who are Master Sommeliers officially. So it is a privilege to have her here with us. And lastly, it's a great honor and privilege to have Ilana Fischer with us as well, CEO at Whisps. She's responsible for these delicious, scrumptious Wisp Cheese Crisps. It's really great to have you guys here, all of you today. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
I want to start with Mark and Gillian. Can you guys give our audience a bit of a history lesson and the path of Beringer Brothers going back, starting in 1876? It's a great history, and we'll be tasting through 5 selections from your lineup of spirit barrel-aged wines.
Sure, I can lead off with some history, and I know Jillian's going to fill us in on some of the food and wine pairing, and she's a great resource for describing wines and talking about those type of pairings, which is kind of outside my element. As a winemaker, I tend to be more critical, about my description of wine. But certainly give you a good dose of our history. The Beringer history is long and it's rich, and goes all the way back to the 1860s, when the two brothers, Jacob and Frederick Beringer, actually immigrated to the United States from Germany. They came from a region in the Rhine area, a town called Mainz. And Frederick came over first. He actually was in the brewing industry, was importing brewing ingredients into the Eastern Seaboard. One thing's, other than wine that Germans know, it's beer, right? So he was doing the brewing business, and he encouraged his brother, who was younger by 6 years, to come over and join him. And he did for a while, but he was a accomplished winemaker in Germany, and he really had the itch to get back to winemaking. And there were a lot of German settlers in the Napa Valley at that time, in Northern California. And so he took a ride on the brand new invention called the Transcontinental Railroad and made his way west. And at that time, a lot of people were taking that ride in search of gold, but Jacob thought of something that was far more richer that was coming out of the soil here, and that was really great wines that were being grown by the European settlers. So there's a lot of Germans and Italians settling in this area at that time. Jacob actually worked for Charles Krug just down the road here, and eventually saved up enough money to purchase the neighboring property. He purchased it with all the money he had saved. It was all the money he had, so he needed some help, and he ended up encouraging his brother to invest with him. Sight unseen, Frederick actually wrote him a check for half the value, and Beringer Brothers was created in 1875. First vintage was in 1876, so now we've had 144 continuous vintages here at Beringer. We use that word continuous because we actually made it through Prohibition. We were actually licensed to produce wine during the Prohibitionary period. So we have a very long history because of that. It also made us very well positioned when Prohibition ended to get very quickly back to making wine, because we had wine grapes in the ground where many other producers had pulled their grapes out, put in table grapes, or had gone to other crops or livestock or things like that. So when we got back to making wine in the 30s, after Prohibition, it was a tough time during the wine business, and eventually my family decided to sell. I actually just returned to Beringer in 2015 to become their 8th chief winemaker. We have a long history of making some award-winning wines. If we look at our private reserve Cabernet Sauvignon, our portfolio, it's a consistent 95+ point rated wine. One of the few wines to be rated #1 wine in the world by the Wine Spectator as well. Now, the Beringer Brothers has kind of become a new extension of our brand. And it started out just a couple of years ago, and it really harkens back to our tradition of also distilling. One thing we also did is we made brandy here at Beringer. And that was part of the medicinal side, I guess, of Prohibition. We were medicinal and sacramental wine, or for religious purposes. And so we did have this history of distilling. And so, there's been this trend, obviously, in spirits where people were using wine barrels or sherry barrels, port barrels, all these things to put various spirits in, like Scotch whiskey. And this crossover has occurred where people are starting to put wine into spirits barrels. And we felt we were really well positioned to play in that area. And not only were we able to play in that area, we've kind of come to dominate that area. It's actually done quite well. We have one of the strongest brands in that category. And it's been really fun to work with, and now to really branch out. We started out with a red blend and a Cabernet and a Chardonnay, and now we've got some new interesting ones coming out with the Tequila barrel, Sauvignon Blanc, and our rye whiskey barrel aged wine as well. And it's a short duration in these barrels. Actually, we make the wine somewhat separately. We take the wine, we put it into these spirit barrels for about 60 days. It picks up that characteristic very quickly, and it can be quite strong. And so we don't want it to be overpowering. I think some of the other products out there on the market are overwhelmed by that characteristic, and you can't see the wine through it. And we really want you to still be able to see the characteristics of the wine. So it's a short period in there, and it's just enough to pick up a lot of those nuances. It's still quite a strong wine. You get a lot of this, in some of them we see butterscotch and nutty characteristics and caramel and all these really interesting things that don't typically show up in a lot of our more traditionally made wines. So it makes it quite interesting, and it can make for some really creative pairings. So I'll toss it over to Gillian to talk a little bit more about the flavors and how it can pair with foods.
Sure. What a great little glimpse of the history, the great history of Beringer, and an introduction to, like you said, an extension, which is the Beringer Brothers line of, like you said, they maintain their varietal character and really do appeal to a different subset of wine consumer that might like some of those more pronounced notes of the caramel and butterscotch and all those things that we get from these great barrels. I just wanted to point out to everybody who's on my holiday display of Whisps and Beringer Brothers, I have a stag here, and I have every flavor of Wisp hanging on the antlers so that, whenever I feel the need, I can just grab a bag right here. What a great thing. And I have some Beringer Brothers Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay ready to go for this tasting. And you know what, Sam? You beautifully introduced me. I am a master sommelier, and I love champagne and caviar. I love foie gras and sauterne, but I also love Beringer Brothers with cheese wisps. And I had to try these over and over, and the wines, just to get the pairings right for all the viewers out there today. And it was a lot of fun.
Well, we're going to show a diagram a little bit later, because we're going to find a little bit about Wisps momentarily, but we're going to show a diagram of the wines and what you mapped out, Gillian, from the spirit barrel aged wines to the Wisps. But before we do that, maybe we can show everybody a screen here because I thought it was really interesting to learn about not only the process of, which we had that slide up a moment ago, of the making of the wine and the spirit barrels themselves, and then using them. But then you put together a great bullet point slide here on the barrel aroma and flavor profile, which I think is very cool. Can we put that up and have you walk us through it briefly, and then we'll come back to the individual pairings of each wine with Wisps.
Absolutely. And I'm sitting here with one of the greatest winemakers in California. So for me to talk about oak is that's hard for me to do, but I can certainly do it because I did create this slide. So, and it just kind of gives people an idea of what barrels, what kind of influence it brings to wine, right? So barrels you can order them if you're a winemaker with a light, medium, or heavy toast, and that's the charring on the inside of the barrel. And the heavier the toast, right, logically, the more intense flavor profiles you're going to get. You're going to get into more of the caramel and some of those heavier flavors versus light toasting, where you might get some, just really subtle vanilla and baking spice. So, and, there are different types of oak. So American oak historically will impart some vanilla, coconut. It's higher in lactones, and so it can impart a little bit more of a sweetness, which is why it's used in bourbon production, to give that really nice hit of vanilla. French oak is a little bit more subtle, and that kind of gives you a little bit more of those subtle baking spices And, I think for traditional winemaking, a combination of both is sometimes what winemakers use. Sometimes they'll use all American oak, sometimes all French, or mix it up. It's kind of like their spice rack, if you will, because it is what imparts all of those different characteristics into the wine. And as Mark said, we only put anything from the Beringer Brothers line into these spirit barrels, because they've taken on the influence of the spirit as well as the barrel itself for a very short time, because we still want them to have their varietal characteristics, but yet have that kind of, like I said, a little bit more of an impact on the drinker, maybe, give you a real sensation of, again, some of those really lovely, like caramel, nutty, spicy characteristics.
So break it down for us very basically. So a barrel is used to make bourbon, and then at some point it comes to Beringer Brothers, and you will use it to age a Chardonnay, or you use it to age a red blend. How long was it a bourbon barrel, and then when did it come to you?
Well, that might be more a question for Mark, but what I can say is we will only put the wine into that barrel for about 60 days. So I don't know, Mark, if you want to speak more to that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it can vary depending on the type of barrel we're getting, because we're working with various providers to get us those barrels. And most of them use them for a pretty extended period of time. They've had the spirits in them for a while. And the difference between spirits and wine with aging is they will typically fill them once and then leave it until the time they take the spirits out. And some of those are made for, 3 years, 4 years. Some, with really high-end whiskeys, they might go as long as, decades. And they just allow it to evaporate and concentrate in that barrel, and the barrel will absorb a lot of that quality because it's kind of being transpired through the pores of the oak outward for that evaporative process. So it ends up changing the barrel, and they get used for multiple fills on some of the ones that they don't age as long. So when we get them, they're pretty saturated, and it may even have a little bit of the spirit still in them in order to maintain them, because when we transport them, we don't want them to dry out and fall apart. So we get a lot of that influence from that barrel. And so the period of time is very short. And it's been kind of a fun process to see how this works. And, there's no textbook for this. This is not something I studied when I was in school back at Fresno State to get my winemaking degree. We're into new territory. This is innovative territory. And it's been fun to figure it out and see what works. And 60 days seems to be the sweet spot.
That's really interesting to hear. Last question, and then I'm going to kick it over to Ilana to tell us about the provenance of Whisps and where these wonderful things come from and how they're made. Were the founding brothers from Beringer the first people to use spirit barrels for wine aging?
No, I wouldn't say we're the first. I mean, actually, there was a few in the category already, but it was a relatively new category when we decided to get into it. And we took a little bit different approach than some of the others prior to us. But I don't think it was, I think it was something that was probably practiced for many years without some sort of marketing approach to it. Barrels were being used for various purposes, and they were transportation vessels. In the early days, we didn't sell the wine in bottles. We shipped the barrel to New York, and they put it in the shop, and then the customer brought their own bottle in and filled it up and paid the price and took it home. It was bring your own container. And the barrel was essentially just a transportation device. And it wasn't until later that we realized that the barrel was actually imparting a quality that the wine was actually better at the other end. And so they were being used for various things being put in them. There could have been cognac shipped one direction and from France up to the northern area, and then would ship something else back in it. So it wasn't until really the modern era that we started using these things as aging casks, because we always used really large casks before.
Yeah, interesting. Those of us on the East Coast, Northeast, are getting a major snowstorm. So somebody in the chat said, which I thought was a great observation, spirit barrel aged wine sounds excellent, especially during a blizzard here in New York. So Very cool. Well, I want to pass it over to Ilana Fischer, who's the CEO of Whisps. And Ilana, we'd love to hear more about. I've only discovered these wonderful delights recently. How did these cheesy crisps come to life under your brand, and where are you headed with them? Because they really are amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, well, thanks for having me. This is such an honor and so interesting to hear from Mark and Gillian too. So, yeah, I'm really excited to talk about Whisps. We are a pure cheese crisp, and the concept is actually quite old. Italian families have been grating Parmesan cheese and baking it in their ovens to make something called frico for generations, probably hundreds and hundreds of years. It's very delicious. And anyone can do it at home. You just grate Parmesan cheese, you put it in the oven at 350 for 10 minutes, and it comes out nice and crispy. It's absolutely a wonderful treat and great for topping on salads and snacking on. The challenge with frico is that it has a shelf life of 15 minutes. You basically have to bake it and eat it right away before it gets kind of gummy and oily and unpleasant. And I actually got a job at the largest Italian cheese company in the United States in 2014. And, I came to that company through sort of a strange path. I worked in cheese shops on the weekends, but had a more traditional business career that I was pursuing, and then got a call from this Italian cheese company that they were looking for somebody. So I went over to this cheese company to start an innovation team. And this concept of a pure cheese crisp was something that they had been noodling on for a long time. And I got there and sort of picked up that concept, and we developed Whisps, and basically what Whisps are is exactly what I just described, which is grated cheese baked and it turns into a crisp. What's really special and different about Whisps is that not all Parmesan cheese is created equal, just like not all, Sauvignon Blanc or Cabernet is created equal. They all taste quite different. And not only do they all taste quite different when you're eating the cheese, but they bake very, very differently. So one of the first things that I did was to really hone in on the right blend of specific Parmesan cheeses to use in Whisps. And you showed at the beginning of the hour our copper vat, which kind of looked a little bit behind your head like a space vessel, but it's actually a vat that we have in our cheese making plant in Wisconsin, where we put the milk, and then you turn the milk into curds before you press it into cheese. We do that in a copper vat, which is how they make Parmigiano Reggiano in Italy. And it's not common for American Parmesan. Yeah, there's the picture of the vat. It's quite beautiful in person. I think this picture is actually really pretty beautiful as well, but most vats are stainless steel vats. So most cheese that you'll eat in America is made in a stainless steel vat. Our Parmesan is made in a copper vat. What that does is it imparts a really nice sort of caramel, nutty, rich flavor to the cheese beyond just kind of sharp saltiness, which is what a lot of domestic Parmesans taste like. It also bakes really, really nicely in our ovens when we're baking the Whisps. And so that's something that's very, very special about Whisps, is that we use this very particular Parmesan cheese that's only available to us, and that bakes so nicely. The picture you were just showing right before this one, Sam, was a picture of our Parmesan aging on shelves. And one of the things that we do with our Parmesan cheese to help the flavor really develop and to turn it into to sort of draw out some of the complexity and nuances of that copper that will leave it with almost like a fruity taste, is we age the cheese naked, as it's called. So a lot of cheese that is made in the United States is actually aged in cryovac bags. They press the curd, they throw it into a bag, they age it for the amount of time that is required by law to age cheese. So depending on the type of cheese, that's anywhere from 30 days to 12 months. We age our Parmesan cheese for well over a year, which is longer than required, but is what we think is important for getting the flavor that we need. And we age it this way. We age it not in a bag, so that it's really sort of able to develop its complex flavors without being effectively steaming itself in a bag. We also have our partner, that is the company that makes the cheese, has a team that this is like the best job on the planet that nobody knew existed, which is, the job is called a cheese grater, and not a grater with a T, not somebody actually grating cheese, but somebody tasting cheese and giving it a grade. So saying this is an A or an A- or a B. And we have cheese graters that taste every single lot of cheese before it turns into a wisp, so that we don't have a scenario where we're just saying, all right, at 10 months, we put the cheese into wisps, or at 16 months, we put the cheese into wisps. We pick the cheese based on its particular moment and when it has the proper and appropriate level of flavor for wisps to turn into a wisp. And that's when we pull it into to the plant and grate it and bake it. So yeah, that is a job that is pretty awesome. They literally just taste cheese all day, every day, and then decide what is ready for what use. The other thing that I want to just talk about really quickly is our cheddar wisps, which our Parmesan wisps are really, that's our number one flavor. It's our Parmesan is our first flavor. It's our most popular flavor so far, but it's getting chased quite quickly by cheddar. And when we developed the Parmesan wisps, we weren't sure if they were going to do well. We launched them, and then they started literally like flying off the shelves, and we were unable to keep up with demand. We had to just focus on production and building out the lines and buying more ovens. And we spent really over a year with just Parmesan cheese crisps in the market, because we were so busy just making the capacity available to produce them, that we stepped back after about a year and said, we should probably come up with a second or third flavor. This is kind of crazy, and it seems like it's doing really well. It takes all of like 30 seconds to figure out that the flavor that most Americans want in a cheese snack is cheddar. So that was a very easy research project for us. And then what actually ended up being really, really difficult is that at the time we didn't make a cheddar cheese. There's hundreds, probably thousands of cheesemakers in the United States and all over the world that make cheddar cheese. We never made cheddar, so we went to the plant and got all excited to develop our cheddar cheese wisps, and we bought cheese, and we brought aged cheese, young cheese, sharp cheddar, mild cheddar, low fat, yellow, white, Irish, English, Wisconsin, California, Vermont. We bought cheddar from all over the place. Like I was saying about Parmesan, not all cheese bakes evenly, so we were expecting to do some work to figure out the right cheddar that would work for wisps. And so we put in cheddar through the ovens in lots of different forms, lots of different combinations, and nothing worked. It was either way too oily, or when we used reduced fat cheddar, frankly, it just kind of tasted like cardboard. There was no cheese flavor there. And so we actually went to our master cheesemaker, who works at our Parmesan plant and runs our Parmesan plant, and said, we need you to make us a cheddar for wisps. And so we actually delayed the launch of cheddar. We went back to literally square one and took the milk and made a specific cheddar recipe just for wisps. And that's really, I think, the thing I'm most proud of, is that we now have a wisp that tastes really nicely like cheddar, and I'm a huge fan of Cheez-Its. I think it sort of delivers on that Cheez-It cheesy flavor without being oily, and sort of delivers that nice toasted flavor. I really, really love our cheddar wisps, and that is something that is incredibly special and unique to us, and that I'm just really proud of. So I would encourage people to try both the Parm and the cheddar if you're going to try two flavors, because those are both really special for us.
Well, it's so interesting hearing about how it came to be and the process. One of the questions that's just come up in the chat is, where are the cheeses processed? Is it Midwest? Is it Wisconsin?
Yeah, we We make the cheeses in Northwest Wisconsin, and we run a plant there in Turtle Lake, Wisconsin, called Lake Country Dairy. It's a wonderful state-of-the-art facility. It's modeled on Italian cheese production plants, and really it's an amazing plant to see. And we source our milk from 4 local family farms for that particular plant. So all of the milk is trucked locally. We are in very close contact and relationships, have good relationships with those farmers, and then we can also be very, very connected with them in terms of how they treat the animals, what they feed the animals, and then we are able to sort of sign contracts with them that allows them to benefit from, this is one of our farms, it allows them to benefit from having some financial sustainability and some commitment. They sell all of their milk to us, so there's no sort of risk on their end. They have a good sustainable business model, and it really is I think a win-win for both of us.
That is great. Well, should we get started with tasting wines and pairing Wisps?
Sure, let's do it.
All right. Gillian, should we put up the master pairing slide briefly so everybody can see that there's going to be a sequence, and then can we go into each one?
Sure.
Okay, great. So
looks like Mark is all ready with his first selection, and
excellent. So this, if you're watching, everybody, is what Gillian slaved over and put together these amazing pairings of the spirit barrel-aged wines with the Wisps. And we're going to go through them. And one of the things I learned in preparing for the conversation today was that Parmesan goes with all 5 of the wines, which that is great because we love the Parmesan Wisps. All right, so are we going to start with the tequila barrel-aged Sauvignon Blanc?
Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
Yeah. And I'll probably just bounce a little bit off of Mark here. But first and foremost, just want to say, Ilana, thank you for a great introduction into this wonderful product. I had no idea. And you can draw so many parallels to winemaking as you can to cheese making.
Yes.
No wonder that both go hand in hand and have a very, very long tradition. And so this is just a new modern spin, I think,
Yes.
for both sides of the business, which is really cool.
Yeah, it is really cool.
So we have our tequila barrel-aged Sauvignon Blanc for all of those who are lucky enough to have this wine and are enjoying it with us. And because Sauvignon Blanc naturally has this kind of grassy, sort of herbal, herbaceous characteristic, it really, the tequila barrels, because of the agave plant, kind of gives it kind of accentuates that and really brings it out. And I do really love what Mark said about how this still really has the characteristic of Sauvignon Blanc, just that kind of grassy herbal freshness, but just with that kind of overlay of a little bit of the spice and kind of earthy characteristic that you get from the tequila barrel. What do you think, Mark?
Yeah, I think when this project began, we'd done the first 3 wines to get things started, and we were looking for, where to go next. And it was one of, the associate winemakers here that we work with, because we have a big team that help support us here at the winery. And, he just threw out this idea. It's like, we should do tequila barrels with Sauvignon Blanc. And we all kind of pondered it, and, it was like, well, of course, when you think about, if you are a tequila lover, what goes great with tequila, and that's lime, right? And what kind of wine has that type of characteristic? Well, it's Sauvignon Blanc, especially if you get it on the lower ripeness end of the spectrum, because Sauvignon Blanc can range anywhere from really acidic citrus tones all the way up to really tropical pineapple type characteristics or lychee. And so, yeah, putting it into that spectrum of citrus and then putting in the tequila barrels for just those 60 days, it makes this really interesting wine. And it may not be for everybody because it has that very distinct characteristic. I mean, if you like tequila, maybe love tequila, it really has those interesting characteristics. And I find it to be a really fascinating wine, and it can pair with a lot of interesting foods. It's a really, out of the box kind of thinking product for us.
Yeah, I thought this one, Mark, was spectacular. As the first time I had it was today. I'd had the bourbon barrel-aged Chardonnay previously and loved it, but this one really knocked my socks off. It's so distinctive, and you do get that sensibility and that flavor from you can get the tequila sense. Olivia has a question. Was it hard to source the tequila barrels? Are they harder to come by than the bourbon barrels?
Not that much harder. I mean, we did have to find, a true tequila barrel from Mexico and get those barrels up into the country. But we'd had a little experience bringing some barrels in with one of our other projects, one of our sister wineries, with some rum barrels we had to bring in from out of the country. So it was something that we had done before, but certainly it's easier to get bourbon barrels because we have such a domestic market for whiskey, right? There's a lot more opportunities for that, but we found a good relationship and it seems to be working well.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I paired this with the tomato basil wisps just because of that basil kind of herbal element in the Sauvignon Blanc. And I tried this crushed with some arugula in a nice salad, just in a light kind of citrus vinaigrette, which was awesome. I also had this I did a little topping of some sun-dried tomatoes that were in some nice oil and spices, and just did that on top of this, and really fantastic pairing with the barrel-aged Sauvignon Blanc.
Yeah, it pops when you have a bite of that tomato basil wisp, and then have a sip of the Sauvignon Blanc. It really pops. Good job, Gillian. Excellent. All right.
I'm waiting for Mark's approval, because that's what matters most to me.
You did all of this, while I was so busy the wine, 90 wines from the current vintage, and wine is not on my agenda after hours, I can tell you that. But this is actually my first opportunity to try those together, and I kind of wanted to do it that way, where I'm kind of a participant in this as well, and that's a fantastic pairing. I mean, I'm surprised by that. It's my first time trying the tomato basil too, and I think just as soon as I opened the bag, the fragrance of the basil came out immediately.
Yeah, I love that. I love that one, and it's sort of like our take on pizza, basically, but sort of like a margarita fresh pizza. And yeah, I agree. This Sauvignon Blanc has a nice punch to it, and it's a really sort of strong flavor in a really good way. I love Sauvignon Blanc, and this is definitely one of my favorites.
Yeah, plus the tomato aspect, I think, really provides a nice little backdrop of acidity to kind of the acidity in the wine too, which is nice.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, Gillian, should we move on to is the next one the Chardonnay?
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. I will share my screen and we will show everybody the notes on this.
Yeah, so I think bourbon barrels as opposed to tequila barrels probably makes the most sense with Chardonnay, because our palates are so kind of geared towards this butterscotch, buttery element that you can get out of a lot of really great Chardonnays. We just wanted to, I think, really accentuate that. Chardonnay on its own is a pretty neutral grape varietal, and we say neutral meaning, it doesn't have these overwhelming aromatics like a Sauvignon Blanc or a Riesling. It's a little bit more subtle. And so really it is, in fact, kind of the process that brings out the characteristics of Chardonnay. And, depending on where it grows. So, for us, the Chardonnay that we use in this wine definitely has this more kind of golden, delicious apple, little hints of citrus, but more of that ripe apple, borderline, almost tropical fruit characteristic that I think is really nice. And just because of the butterscotch caramel notes that the bourbon barrel loans to the wine, it just gives it this really nice, very generous, lots of fruit and flavor, and a lovely expression of this varietal. And interesting to see what bourbon barrels can do to Chardonnay.
Yeah, absolutely. You get those notes that you mentioned of the caramel, butterscotch, and I just tried it with that tangy ranch wisp, and it's magical.
I mean, who knew? I was kind of hoping that the tanginess and the creaminess of the ranch would be a really nice partner for our bourbon barrel aged Chardonnay. It looks like Mark is blown away by the pairing. So, when you can impress the winemaker, it's a good day.
No, when I got my samples of the lineup, one of the first ones I gravitated to was ranch, and one of those flavors that I think I just enjoy, chips and other things. So it was one of the ones I really liked out of the whole lineup right off the bat. And then this is my first time trying with the wine, so I find it really interesting because I think the Chardonnay does have a lot of those confectionery elements that you mentioned, and the ranch just really kind of brings out some of the creaminess too. And I just amazing to see these combinations. A lot of fun.
Yeah, and I also because I love corn. It's just like one of my favorite things on the planet. And we're still getting some pretty good white corn here in California. And so I also kind of crumbled these into some poblano chili and corn chowder with this wine. And it was also really fantastic. So
It's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to, kind of crumble these up into a really nice savory soup, maybe a cream-based soup, because I think the creaminess will pair alongside the texture of the Chardonnay really well. So, and it is that time of year where we're craving these, creamy soups, maybe even a clam chowder of sorts, right? Just that cream-based, really matching the richness and texture of the Chardonnay.
Yeah, it's
just
great.
On its own, it's great too.
All right, I'm gonna put up our tasting map briefly here again, and I think the next one is the bourbon barrel aged red blend with the barbecue flavor of Whisps. Is that right, Gillian?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So we'll
got mine right here.
I will also show everybody the tasting notes for that bourbon barrel aged red blend as well.
I could be wrong, but I think, and Mark, you could confirm, I think this was our first wine in the lineup, or was it the Cabernet?
They kind of came along together. But yeah, we did the three in the beginning. It was the red blend, the Cabernet, and the Chardonnay. But I think the one that we really, in the innovation process, it would have been a first one they kind of launched together. But yeah, this was really where it all started.
Yeah.
And by the way, Mark, somebody commented earlier in the chat, and by the way, great group tonight watching. You guys have been so engaged and lots of great comments in the chat. Somebody mentioned that they were familiar with and really enjoyed the reds, and that the Sauv Blanc and the Chardonnay were a real discovery. They weren't even aware of those. They had been trying the spirit barrel aged reds from Beringer Brothers.
Yeah, I think the the whole premise of it seems to go together, right? I mean, when you think of bourbon, you think of a brown beverage, you think of cold weather, you think of it warming you from the core, right? And I think red wines are in that same category. So you don't kind of think of maybe white varieties going into that realm, but it's really interesting how it does actually work and how it expresses kind of more like a light blonde Scotch, like a sherried Scotch. It puts me into that kind of realm of thinking.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that brings up a great point, Mark, because if somebody really enjoys those heavier spirits, but maybe it's, 5 or 6 o'clock in the afternoon, this is probably a good wine for them to enjoy. I mean, especially now as the sun is going down at 5:30 and, here in California, we have these huge diurnal shifts in temperature. So we're at 30 degrees in the morning, we're in t-shirts by afternoon, and then we're back in slippers and flannel pajamas by 6 p.m. because it's so cold. So good opportunity to enjoy these wines. So I love the barrel-aged red blend just because it's so interesting to me. The varietal, just mixing it up, it's, primarily sourcing from Paso Robles, where because of their climate and where they're situated, they can grow everything, but definitely specialize in more the Zinfandel, more the Rhone, kind of the darker, spicier varietals. And that's what I love about this wine is that spice, that dark berry, deep spice that you get. A little bit, again, of that influence of the bourbon barrel coming across in a real toastiness and caramel. But to me, it's really the varietals that kind of sing here with the spice. And I always, when I think of Zinfandel or Syrah, Petite Syrah, any of those dark, spicy wines, I think of like the tanginess of barbecue sauce. They just really pair well for me. And I don't like to use the word jammy too much because it might insinuate something that is really sweet. And this wine is not really sweet, but it does have kind of a rich raisiny character to some of the varieties that are in here. And it gives you lots and lots of dark fruit. And I just think that provides like the perfect contrast to the tanginess of barbecue and all those flavors.
I agree. And I think the smoky notes in this red blend just pair perfectly with the barbecue flavor of the Wisp.
This is a delicious wine. Oh my gosh, I just love this. It's so drinkable, also so interesting and complex. I love it.
I find that it reminds me of like cobbler. It's got like this berry core that's been cooked, little confectionery type of element, but with that pastry or doughy crust on top that comes from the barrel. And it just brings that mixture of compounds. It just makes me think of a fresh baked cobbler.
This one is particularly striking, the combination.
The barbecue is sort of our sweetest. Someone mentioned in the chats about a sweet wisp, and the barbecue is the one that I think is the sweetest that we have. And it does feel like they're a really good natural pair together, these wines.
So I have to ask you, as a barbecue aficionado, is this Southern? Like what type of barbecue are we talking about?
Oh Lord.
Were you trying to emulate a certain, style of regional barbecue?
It's
like, oh, sorry, go ahead, Gillian. Maybe
no, I was going to say, to me, it's very like hickory, like
it's like a smoky, sweet barbecue, not like a dry rub barbecue spice. So yeah. We were like, oh, should we call it, should it be Kentucky or Louisville? Or like, there's all these there's a whole world of barbecue, apparently. I didn't know about it. This is more like, I think of it as sort of smoky barbecue sauce that you'd buy in the store.
Yeah, and again, like, break some of these up into maybe a bowl of chili or something like that, instead of like using cheddar cheese or the normal accoutrements, like really wonderful.
Yeah.
But I love the tanginess of this. And like I said, I think it provides the great contrast to the real kind of grapey cobbler fruit characteristics that you get from the wine.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Ilana, I agree with you. When I tasted this, today was the first day, it really blew me away. This blend has a wonderful and unique characteristic to it, and it does go great with the barbecue wisp. But the wine itself, Mark, kudos.
That's amazing.
Cool. Should we move to the bourbon barrel aged Cabernet Sauvignon, Gillian?
Sure, let's do it.
Excellent. So this one goes with the cheddar wisp.
Well,
according to your research.
Yeah, well, you know, aged kind of that aged cheddar flavor, I think, is always wonderful with the Cabernet Sauvignon based wine. And to me, again, it was just that real savoriness, saltiness of the cheddar flavor that just kind of provided a really good backdrop to the Cabernet Sauvignon. And this to me is one of those wines. I mean, they are all very true to the varietal, but this really tastes like Cabernet Sauvignon. It just has that extra addition of maybe some of those toffee, vanilla-like characteristics. And I think for somebody, because Cabernet Sauvignon, especially when it's young, can be really hard to understand. So if you're just starting to drink wine and just, you know, you like something that's a little bit more rounded out, more mellow on the palate, I think this is a perfect wine for that. But definitely a great cheddar wisp pairing.
And very subtle. The bourbon flavor is very subtle in this one, but it really does kind of make the flavor profile of this wine.
It is more subtle, and that's why I went with a more subtle wisp. I didn't go, you know, with a flavor combination. Just thought, hey, keep it simple, right? We've got great Cabernet Sauvignon, really delicious cheddar that gives you that kind of umami sensation, right, in the taste profile, paired with you know, just a really delicious Cabernet Sauvignon. So a little bit on the, I don't know if you want to add to that, Mark, of.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, Cabernet is more structured naturally. It's the biggest of the red wines, right? So it tends to shoulder the barrel a little bit better, I would say. It doesn't show through as much because the fruit has enough power to kind of hold it back. And I think the cheddar has that similar restraint. I mean, it has that great strong cheddar flavor. I mean, cheddar tends to be a potent cheese, you know, and like I open up the bag, first thing I do, I have to smell it, you know, and get that classic cheddar smell. You can't mistake it. And I think that it stands up to the wine, you know, and it definitely has some good combination there. I really enjoyed it.
Mark, we have a question from Jan who asks, are these wines all non-specific vintages?
Yeah, usually they're pretty non-specific. We do a little bit of blending, and it's not that they're not vintage. It's just that sometimes we blend over vintages just to have better consistency at this tier. But usually they are vintage specific. You just can't tell it from the label. We can tell it when we look at the label because they're hidden in there. But it's just not something we try to focus on in this particular style of wine.
Got it. All right, I'm gonna toggle back everybody to our pairing guide, just to touch base, and this will be for the last wine in the tasting, which was the one that most intrigued me, Mark. The notion of the rye barrel as a vehicle was fascinating, and I found this wine to be really interesting. So this is a rye barrel aged red blend. Is that right?
That's right. So, rye being also a whiskey, it's a different style of whiskey. So there's a lot of similarities to the bourbon barrel, but it just has a slightly different character to it. And we do a little bit of a different blend for it in order to express those characteristics. So, it's an interesting style of wine. Unfortunately, I don't have that wine. It's so new. I couldn't even get a bottle here at the winery. So I don't have it to taste today, but I have had it in the past, and it's really a nice wine. It's our newest product, actually. We just launched it.
It is delicious, and the fact that it intrigued me sort of at reading the label. Once I tasted it, it fulfilled that level of intrigue. And this one, Gillian, we pair with the Asiago Pepper Jack.
Yes, right here. And Mark, huge apologies that you do not have the rye barrel.
I know we tried to dig it up today. For some reason that it didn't come into the warehouse, so we couldn't get it today, but that's all right. I'll get it eventually.
Yeah, and you've tried it a bunch of times, so you are familiar with the flavor profile. I thought it worked well with the two kind of unique flavor additions to the Wisp. So Asiago and Pepper Jack, of course, being a little bit on the spicy side, but I didn't find it to be too spicy. And you've got like the spiciness of the pepper. A little bit of the creaminess comes in with the Jack cheese, and Asiago just has, to me, such a cool flavor profile. This is leading with Pinot Noir. So again, unlike the Cabernet Sauvignon, you have a little bit, I think, softer wine, maybe a little bit less tannic, a little more fruity and subtle. So because of that lack of tannins and that more kind of dark berry fruit, I thought that little hint of spice would work really well with this. And I was right. It does work really well. No, I'm just kidding. I thought it worked really well. But because of that combination, I think it really lends itself beautifully to this unique blend. Like I said, it's Pinot Noir driven, so it's a little bit softer, a little more fruity, lots of raspberry, strawberry, really beautiful fruit flavors that kind of provide a really good backdrop to all the savoriness that's in these.
Gillian and Mark, in a good way, I'm getting a jamminess from this, and it goes great with the spicy finish of the delicious Asiago Pepper Jack Wisp.
Yeah. You want to be really careful when you have spice because it can accentuate alcohol. So you need a lot of fruit in the wine to really kind of counterbalance that,
Absolutely. We have a question from somebody in the chat. Nancy asked, do you suggest aging or holding these wines before drinking them? Or are they in the drink right away category?
We really look at these as being in the drink right away category. They will age a little bit. The bigger reds will. They could, take a little time, but really this category is meant to be enjoyed early, enjoyed with food. And so the majority of where we position this wine is in grocery stores and outlets like that. And you can really tell the vintage if you do want to really look. I'll give it away. It's actually hidden like right here in the very bottom. You can see that the first two digits are small and the vintage is there. So if you are really looking for a specific vintage, you can locate it that way. But right now we're on the 2017 vintage, which is primarily what's in market. And that's really, I think they're drinking beautifully right now. The beauty is you don't have to wait either. A lot of the wines that we make right now need some time in the cellar before you can actually open them.
We have a question from Carol. When will the bourbon barrel aged red blend be back in stock? She's saying it's out of stock on the Beringer Brothers webpage.
Uh-oh. I don't think that's a question that Mark or I can answer, but hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, it's my job to make it, but I can't control where it goes from there. But I know it's been doing so well. We've been moving through it pretty quickly, and we're doing our best to keep it supplied. But um, it took off much quicker than we could have planned for. And and it takes us a little while to make the wine. 2017 was a few years ago, so we're trying to catch up with the current releases in order to make more, in order to catch up with demand. I think just like, talking earlier, Wisp was in the same situation, right? In the beginning, trying to just make as much Parmesan crisp as you could, and you couldn't really innovate. So that's one of the downsides of success, I guess. It's not a bad thing to have.
That I was going to say, Mark, that's a good problem when people are looking for it. I'm going to put up on the screen. Somebody asked to kind of scroll through the 5 wines. So if everyone would stay with me, we'll scroll through from the top, and then I want to look at the tasting guide again as well. But this is the Sauvignon Blanc, the Chardonnay, the Bourbon barrel aged red blend, the Cabernet Sauvignon, and the rye barrel aged red blend. In case you needed that for ordering or other purpose. And let's also just go back to, if we would, and I'd love for Ilana to weigh in on her favorite pairings. I mean, since you spend a lot of time, quality time with the Wisps product, Ilana. Gillian's got some great pairings here, but I'm sure you have some other suggestions for foods, food combinations with Wisps, as well as just general wine directions. So let me go back to that. Bear with me a moment. I will take a look at the pairing guide. Ilana, what is your go-to?
I think one of the things that we didn't really talk about today that Gillian pointed out, I thought so nicely, is that the Parmesan Wisps go with all wines, and that is not really surprising, because Parmesan cheese is sort of the Italian, the king of cheeses, and it's what everybody sort of thinks of when they think of sitting down for a meal with a glass of wine. You often think of a sort of hearty dish of pasta or something like that. So it makes a lot of sense to me that the Parmesan worked well. Parmesan has a nice, nutty, caramel, umami, salty flavor to it. It's very rich and very complex. So it sort of feels like like you were saying, Gillian, at the beginning, wine and cheese are very similar in that as they age, they get better and better and more complex, and some of those nuanced flavors that you can't taste at the beginning really become the sort of shining stars at the end. And I think that's the case with cheese and wine, and certainly Parmesan cheese is sort of the penultimate aged cheese, and so that feels like a very natural match for me. And then I've been noticing in the chats, a few people talking about using the Wisps on things like baked potatoes or soups or salad. We do hear that a lot, and I do it myself too. It's nice to add sort of some crunch to something that might not otherwise have it, especially if you're trying to avoid carbs and you don't want to, use croutons or some of those more traditional crunchy foods. So I personally am a purist when it comes to Wisps, and I like to eat them out of the bag, and that's my favorite way to eat them, and that's what I do most days at work. But there's a huge group of people on social media that take pictures of Wisps as part of an entree or some type of meal that they're cooking. Another thing that they're really great for is charcuterie boards. So especially as people are preparing for the holidays, and obviously they'll be probably smaller, more intimate this year than normal. But Wisps go really nicely on a board with sliced meats and olives and grapes and some of the more traditional things you eat on a charcuterie board.
Yeah, I love the fact that it's cheese. It's only cheese, and it's, you know, there's no intervention of other things and bad things in them, and they're
No.
you know, whenever you find something like this that's that delicious and that is actually all natural, it's kind of a great day. I have a quick question before we wrap for Mark and Gillian. You know, it's not every day we get you guys on the show, and some of our audience have a couple of questions. If you would bear with us. One of them is Diane says she has a 2009 Beringer Knights Valley Cab. Should she drink it now or should she hold on to it?
Well, personally, I would drink that one now. I mean, the Knights Valley is a great Cabernet Sauvignon, Sonoma County, just north of us here in Napa. And they tend to be more on the early to drink side than, say, our Private Reserve or our Napa Cabernets. 2009 still probably in really good shape. We're talking about 11 years old. So it's probably really in its prime. And I encourage people to drink their wine, not sit on their wine, because we continue to make wine and we want to sell wine. So, you know, it's one of those things where I'm not a collector, I'm a drinker. So if I had an '09, I would probably be looking at consuming it. I like to drink the wines when they're fresher, but it's probably right in there. I mean, Gillian, would you agree? I mean, the '09 is probably showing pretty well right now.
Absolutely. I always try to catch a wine at that, like you said, Mark, right at that sweet spot where you've still got some freshness and vibrancy to the fruit, but you have all those beautiful kind of tertiary, like those bottle bouquet aromatics as well. You have a real like softening of the tannins. I bet it's just perfect right now.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Two other quick questions on the wine side. Myra has a 2009 Beringer Port. How long does that age well?
Now, port is a whole different category. I mean, it can age for a very long time because it's a fortified wine. And that's where we have experience in that kind of winemaking from our past, because we were a distiller. You use brandy in the process to fortify the wine. It arrests the fermentation with some residual sugar and it elevates the alcohol up to closer to 19-20%. So that combination of alcohol with a little bit of residual sugar, and also because we're using these big red varieties there, a lot of times we use Cabernet Sauvignon in that process. It makes a very stable wine. It can age for decades if you want it to. It's also a bottle of wine that you can open and drink over a period of time, because it's not going to go completely dead on you in a couple of days on your counter. I'd still recommend maybe vacuuming it or gassing it, or even maybe putting it in your refrigerator to store it better. But it's a wine that lasts a very long time.
Thank you for that. Last thing, you know, for Gillian and Mark, is it true that due to COVID, all the tasting rooms are closed in Napa and Sonoma?
It will be true as of 11:59 tomorrow evening. We just got notification at noon today that the Bay Area has exceeded their limit for ICU beds. And so it's now official that Napa County will be shutting down for at least 3 weeks starting tomorrow. Up until this point, we've been able to do outside, and we've had a very great outside program with multiple programs, different tiers of wine, all the way from entry level to our reserves, with food pairings. It's actually been really awesome. We have a great property to do that, but unfortunately, through this holiday period, we will be letting everybody spend that time with their families.
I think that's good guidance, Mark. Sorry, Gillian, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, but drink the wines at home. Just like Carol said, thank you, Carol, for the comment. Then we all need to support you and drink at home. Okay.
Well, I'll throw one other thing in there too. You know, we're still allowed to do curbside and delivery. So, you know, obviously shipping in time for the holidays might be an issue and things like that, but you know, we can still send wine to your home. We have our wines obviously in many grocery stores, your fine retail shops, it's available. And if you order will call, we can do drop off or curbside pickup, just like a restaurant can. So those are still options.
Absolutely. Well, we will take those options now, Mark. I, for one, am coming out when things calm down. You have a landmark and absolutely gorgeous location there, and a historic building. So I'm looking forward to coming in person at some point soon.
Please do. I hope when all this gets settled down, everybody comes out to visit. I want to go out and visit some people too. So we'll be ready.
Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in and watching and for the great questions and comments. Thank you, Ilana, Gillian, and Mark for educating us. Here at New York Wine Events, we're all about discovery and education, and I think we did a lot of both tonight. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart, and I wish everyone a happy and healthy holiday season.
Thank you.
And thank you,
Cheers.
everybody.
Take good
Cheers,
care.
everyone.
Get some Wisps and pair it with some Beringer Brothers Spirit barrel-aged wines.
It's so easy.
Yeah.
We'll send to everybody who attended tonight. We'll send around that graphic with the tasting pairings. You'll know what to do. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Take
Thank
care
you.
now.
Okay. Bye.